He only knew that the girl was cold. He only knew that her shoes were soaked through and that she had been standing in the rain for longer than anyone should have to. Walter Bryce noticed her, the way you notice things when you are not looking for them. A small figure crouched under the narrow awning of Garfield's hardware, arms wrapped tight around a cardboard box, head down, shoulders working to stay still. He had been walking from his car to the pharmacy, 3 doors down, collar up against the November rain, thinking about nothing in particular, and then he saw her. He was 61 years old, a senior partner at Bryce & Kellerman, one of the more respected corporate law firms in Halifax. He had argued cases before the Nova Scotia Court of Appeal. He had his suits made in Toronto. He had on occasion been recognized in restaurants. None of that was on his mind when he slowed his pace and looked at the girl more carefully. She was young, 12, maybe 13. The box she was holding was wet at the corners, starting to buckle. Inside it he could see a collection of small things, a tin of soup, a folded paper bag, what looked like a child's winter hat, the kind with ear flaps. Her own jacket was too thin for October, let alone November. Her sneakers were white once, probably. They were not white anymore. He walked past her. He got 3 steps, then he stopped. The rain was picking up. He turned back. "Can I help you carry that?" She looked up. Her eyes were dark and cautious, the kind of eyes that have learned to calculate quickly. She took in his coat, his umbrella, the small pharmacy bag already in his other hand. She didn't answer right away. "It looks heavy," he said, which was not entirely true, but it was getting wet, and so was she. "I'm fine," she said. Then after a pause, "Thank you." He stood there another moment. The awning above them dripped steadily at its edge, a thin curtain of water between them and the street. He could see that she was trying to decide something. So he waited. "I'm going to Cedar Street," she said finally. "But it's far." How far, she considered. Maybe 20 minutes, on foot. He looked at the box. He looked at her shoes. He looked at the rain, which had no intention of stopping. "I'll walk with you," he said, "if that's all right." She studied him again. Then she gave a small nod, the kind that means yes but reserves the right to change the mind later. They set off together, Walter holding his umbrella at an angle that covered them both, though it required him to walk slightly hunched. He was aware of how odd they must look. A man in a wool overcoat and a girl in a faded jacket, moving through the early dark of a Tuesday evening in November, sharing an umbrella down Roby Street. "What's your name?" he asked, once they had walked half a block in silence. She took a moment. "Bay," she said, "short for Beatrice." "That's a good name," he said. Not because it was something to say, but because he meant it. It was the name of Dante's guide. He did not say that. "What's in the box?" he asked instead. "Things for my Gran," Bea said. "She lives on Cedar. She doesn't get out much since her hip." "You shop for—" "Sometimes. After school." A pause. "Except I had to leave early today because the principal called my mum." He didn't ask about that. They walked. The rain softened briefly, then returned. A bus went past and threw a shallow wave of water toward the curb. Walter stepped slightly in front of her without thinking about it, taking the spray on his trouser leg. She noticed. He could tell by the way she glanced at him sideways. "Do you live near Cedar Street?" he asked. She shook her head. "The other direction, North End." So she had come south to her grandmother's, from the North End in November rain, carrying a box. He did the math without saying so. "Will someone walk you back?" "My mum's working," Bea said. "She works evenings. And your Gran, she can't walk with you. That's why I said about the hip." "Right," he said. "Of course." She was not rude when she said it. She was precise. There was a difference, and he appreciated it. They turned onto Cedar Street. The houses here were older, semi-detached, with small front gardens that had given up their flowers for the season. Lights were on in most of the windows. The smell of someone's dinner, something with onions, something warm, drifted through the damp air. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. "Coming to your Gran's after school?" Bea shifted the box in her arms. "Since September. She fell in August. Before that, it was just weekends. That's a lot of Tuesday evenings." She shrugged, but not the shrug of someone who doesn't care. The shrug of someone who has decided not to think too hard about a thing they've already committed to. He thought about his own Tuesdays. His were full of conference calls and document reviews and a standing lunch with the senior partners that he sometimes resented for taking up the middle of the day. He thought about how he had spent last Tuesday specifically and found that he could not remember. "Your grandmother is lucky to have you," he said. Bea didn't respond to that the way he expected. She didn't smile or look pleased. She said quietly, "She had me first." He wasn't sure he understood. Then, after a few more steps, he thought maybe he did. They reached a house with a low iron gate and a porch light that was on. A small wreath on the door, a little early, but there it was. The gate latch was stiff. Bea worked it open with the ease of someone who had done it many times. She turned at the gate. "This is it," she said. "Thank you. You didn't have to." I know, he said. She held the box against her hip and looked at him with those careful eyes. Are you going to be okay getting back? It's still raining. The question surprised him. He had not been asked that in a while, whether he was going to be okay. He was 61 years old and had a car around the corner and a house in the South End with 3 bedrooms and central heating. He was, objectively, going to be fine. But the fact that she asked stopped something in him. This girl, who had walked 20 minutes in the rain with a box for her grandmother, who would now walk home alone in the dark to an empty house because her mother worked evenings. She had paused to ask if he was all right. Yes, he said. I'll be okay. She nodded. Then she went up the porch steps, knocked twice in a specific pattern. Her own knock, he guessed, and waited. He stood at the gate. The door opened. A small white-haired woman appeared, leaning on a cane, her face lighting up when she saw Bia. She said something he couldn't hear. Bia held up the box. The old woman's face went through several things at once. Relief, gratitude, a kind of wonder. And she pulled the girl inside with one arm, the cane swinging. The door closed. He stood in the rain for another moment. Then he walked back to his car. He did not tell anyone about it. There was no one to tell, particularly. His wife, Catherine, had left for a conference in Montreal on the weekend and wouldn't be back until Friday. His daughter Margot lived in Vancouver and called on Sundays. His assistant, Brenda, would have listened, but it was not the kind of thing you brought to the office. He drove home and made himself dinner, which was not something he did often. Usually he ordered in or picked something up. That night he found onions and potatoes and a tin of salmon and made a hash that was not elegant but was warm, and he ate it at the kitchen table instead of at his desk. He thought about Bia. Not in a worried way, more in the way you think about something that has shifted a thing inside you. And you're not quite sure yet what shifted or why. She had not asked him for anything. She had, in fact, initially refused his help. She had thanked him in a way that was genuine without being excessive, and then she had asked if he was going to be okay. He had not been asked that in months. Maybe longer. He thought about the weight of the box. He thought about her white sneakers in the wet. He thought about the knock. 2 knocks, a pause, then one more, and the way the old woman's face had changed when the door opened. He did not think about the firm. He slept better than he had in some time. The following Tuesday, he was in court all morning, and by 4 o'clock he was walking to his car on Barrington Street, and without deciding to, he took the long way back, down Roby, past Garfield's Hardware. She was not there. He felt something that he chose not to name. He kept walking. He was being ridiculous. She had been there once. People were only where you expect them to be in stories, not in life. He was 2 blocks past the hardware store when he saw her. She was half a block ahead of him on the other side of the street, carrying the same cardboard box, or one very like it. No umbrella. The rain today was lighter, more of a mist, but it was settling into her hair and darkening the shoulders of the jacket, which was the same thin jacket as before. He crossed the street. Beatrice, she turned. A flash of surprise, then recognition, then something that took him a moment to identify. It was not suspicion, it was closer to relief. You're the umbrella man, she said. Walter, he said. Walter Bryce, I remember. She shifted the box. You don't have your umbrella today. I left it at the office. He fell into step beside her. Same direction, she said. They walked. This time, there was less silence. She told him about her school. Citadel High, which she liked better than the middle school she'd come from, mainly because there was a ceramics class and she'd been making a small bowl for her grandmother's bedside table. She told him the bowl had cracked twice in the kiln, and that she was on her 3rd attempt and was not going to give up. What kind of clay? He asked, and then immediately felt like a fool, because he knew nothing about clay. But she seemed pleased that he'd asked. Stoneware, she said. It's harder to work with, but it holds better once it fires. My teacher says I have patience for it. Do you? I don't know, Bia said honestly. I just don't like giving up. He thought about that. That's the same thing, he said. I think. She considered this. Maybe. At the gate on Cedar Street, she paused again before going in. My Gran made oatcakes, she said. She had a good day, so she baked. They're in the bag inside. She looked at the box. I could bring you some next time, if you're going this way again. He understood what she was not quite saying. She had noticed that he had come this way twice. She was not pretending otherwise. I'd like that, he said. She nodded and went inside. He started walking down Roby Street on Tuesdays. He told himself various things about this, that it was good for him, that he sat too much, that the South End air was better than the parking garage. All of these things were true, and none of them were the reason. The reason was Bia. Over the weeks that followed, he learned a great deal. He learned that she was 13, almost 14, and that she wanted to study architecture, eventually. Though she hadn't told her mother yet because her mother had strong opinions about practical careers. He learned that her father had left when she was 6, and that she referred to him as the man my mother married, with a precision that was cutting and serene at once. He learned that her grandmother's name was Evelyn, which was a name she did not like, and that she went by Ev to everyone except Bia, who called her Gran. He learned that Bia had been the one to notice her grandmother had fallen. She'd called in the morning instead of the evening, a change in routine prompted by nothing she could later explain, and had heard the voice on the floor, thin and frightened, near the kitchen. The ambulance had been called, the hip had been repaired, and Bia had restructured her Tuesdays. "You saved her," Walter said on the third week when she told him this. "I just called," Bia said. "You called when you didn't have to." She looked at him. She's my Gran. He had a grandmother once. He had not called her enough. He had been very busy. She brought him oatcakes on that third week, wrapped in a paper bag, slightly warm, with a fold at the top to keep the heat in. They were dense and slightly sweet and better than anything he had ordered from a restaurant in recent memory. He ate 2 of them standing on the sidewalks outside the gate, and she watched him with the frank satisfaction of someone whose grandmother has been vindicated. "Tell her they were perfect," he said. "She'll ask me if you really said that, or if I'm being kind. Tell her I ate 2 standing in the rain." Bea smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile fully, and it changed her face entirely, opened it up like a room with the curtains pulled back. "She'll believe that," she said. He walked home. He realized, happy. Not the managed contentment of a successful evening or the brief satisfaction of a one argument, but something simpler and harder to hold. The kind of happy that doesn't announce itself until you're already in it. He thought about his daughter, Margot. She was 34 and worked in urban planning and called him on Sundays. The calls lasted, on average, 11 minutes. He had timed them once, not out of resentment, but out of a habit of measurement he could not seem to break. She loved him. He knew. He loved her. They had never been easy together. She had his stubbornness and her mother's directness, and the combination had produced someone who was formidable and occasionally exhausting. She had moved to Vancouver at 22, and he had not asked her not to. He thought about the last time he had walked somewhere with Margot. Really walked, not from the car to the restaurant. He could not find the memory. There must have been one. He called her on a Wednesday, which he had not done before. She answered with, "Is something wrong?" "No," he said. "I just wanted to call." There was a pause in which she recalibrated. "Okay," she said, and her voice was softer than it usually was on Sundays. "How are you?" "I've been walking," he said. "On Tuesdays." "Walking? Where?" "Through the South End." He thought about how to say it. I met someone," he said, "a girl. 13. She walks to her grandmother's every Tuesday with groceries in the rain, and I started going the same way." Another pause. "That's Margot started, then seemed to choose her words. Is she okay? Does she have?" "She's fine," he said. "She's more than fine. I think she might be one of the better people I've met." He could hear his daughter breathing on the other end of the line. "Dad," she said eventually, "that's a bit lovely." "I know," he said. It surprised me too. November became December. The oatcakes gave way 1 week to shortbread. Gran was having a good spell, Bay reported. The ceramics bowl had survived its 3rd firing. It had a small imperfection on one side, a slight irregularity in the glaze, which her teacher had called a beauty mark and which Bia had accepted because she was tired of the kiln. She brought the bowl one Tuesday, nested in newspaper in a smaller bag inside the box. "She wants you to have it," Bia said. "Gran does." He looked at it. It was not large. It would hold a small handful of things, keys, perhaps, or change. The glaze was a dark teal with a pull of amber at the base, and the imperfection her teacher had named was a ripple near the rim, like water disturbed. It was genuinely beautiful. "She doesn't know me," he said. "She knows you," Bia said. "I told her," she said. "Anyone who eats 2 oatcakes standing in November rain is a person she'd like." He held the bowl carefully. "It weighed more than it looked like it should. Tell her thank you." "You could tell her yourself," Bia said, with the careful neutrality of someone who has thought about this for aces and is now saying it for the first time. He looked at her. "If you wanted," she added. He was not a man who went into other people's houses easily. He had a quality of self-containment that his wife called reserve and his junior partners called intimidating, and that he himself thought of, on honest days, as shyness wearing a better suit. He did not drop in. He did not impose. He had not been inside a stranger's home in longer than he could remember. "Next week," he said, "if she wouldn't mind." Bea's face did the thing it did when she was trying not to show that she was pleased. "I'll ask," she said, which meant yes. He brought shortbread. He had not made it himself. He was honest with himself about his limits, but he had gone to the Portuguese bakery on Gottingen Street, which Catherine had once said was the best in the city, and he had chosen carefully. He stood on the porch on the following Tuesday, while Bay knocked her knock, and when the door opened and Ev appeared, smaller than he'd imagined, sharper-eyed, her white hair pulled back with a practicality that suited her. He held out the bag and said, "I've heard good things about your oatcakes." Ev looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Bia. Then she stepped back from the door. "Come in then," she said. "The kettle's already on." He stayed for an hour. He had not intended to. He had thought perhaps 20 minutes, tea and politeness, and then the respectful departure of someone who knows not to overstay. But Ev was not a woman who allowed vagueness. She asked him what kind of law he practiced, and when he said corporate, she asked what that meant, and when he explained, she said, "So you help the money talk to itself," which was so accurate that he laughed. A real laugh, not the managed variety. And she looked satisfied. She told him about her hip and the surgery with a detail and exactness that suggested she had spent time being spoken at by doctors and had decided to master their language rather than be diminished by it. She told him that Bea had found her and that she had been on the floor for 4 hours before that and that she had spent at least 2 of those hours deciding she was not going to die in her kitchen. "Why not?" he asked. "Because I hadn't given Bea the bowl yet," she said simply. Then, "The recipe is in the bowl, actually, written on a piece of paper and kept underneath it, an old habit." He looked at Bea, who looked at the bowl, which was now sitting on the side table next to Ev's chair. "I didn't know that," Bea said quietly. "That's because you didn't need to yet," Ev said. There was a silence in the room that was not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that forms around something true after it has been said. He drank his tea and ate the shortbread, which Ev evaluated with forensic attention before declaring it acceptable. He learned that Ev had worked for 30 years as a hospital administrator and had once reorganized the entire records system of a regional health authority and was prouder of that than anything else in her professional life. He learned that she had raised Bea's mother, Sandra, alone after Bea's grandfather had died young, and that this had been hard and was not something she spoke of often, but she was speaking of it now because he was a stranger, and strangers were sometimes easier. "Bea talks about you," Ev said, near the end of the hour, when the tea was finished and the shortbread was gone. "She calls you the man with the umbrella." "I didn't have it the second time," he said. "She mentioned that too. I've studied him. She said you still walked with her." "It was on my way." Ev made a sound that was not quite agreement. "Young people know," she said, "when an adult is being convenient and when they're choosing. She knows the difference." He thought about that on the walk home. He walked slowly, though the cold had sharpened, and his coat was not quite warm enough for December. He thought about choosing. He thought about the things in his life he had drifted into and the things he had actually decided, and he found, when he looked honestly, that the ratio was not what he would have liked. He had drifted into corporate law, more or less. He had drifted into the house in the South End. He had not drifted into Catherine. That had been a drifted into real one, made with full understanding of what it cost and what it gave. But Margot's childhood, he had drifted through large parts of that, showing up when showing up was easy and stepping back when it was not. He had not drifted into Tuesdays on Roby Street. He had chosen that. He had turned back. It seemed in the cold December dark like the beginning of something. He wasn't sure what. He thought it was probably not too late to find out. On the last Tuesday before the Christmas break, Dee was not at Garfield's. She was not ahead of him on Roby Street. He walked all the way to Cedar and stood at the gate for a moment, feeling something he recognized as worry, and then the door opened before he knocked and Bea appeared, already in her coat. "Gran had a bad day," she said. "I came early. She's sleeping now." She looked at him with those careful, honest eyes. "You still came. I walk this way on Tuesdays," he said. She looked at him the way Ev had looked at him, the way that said she knew the difference between convenient and chosen. "I made something," she said, and held out a small envelope. Inside was a card, handmade, with a drawing on the front, a street in rain, 2 figures under an umbrella, one tall, one small. The lines were simple, architectural, more precise than sentimental. It was, he thought, exactly right. Inside the card she had written, "Thank you for turning back. Most people don't." He stood at the gate on Cedar Street in the December cold and read those words twice. Then he folded the card carefully and put it in the interior pocket of his coat, close. "Next year," he said. "Same day?" Bea nodded. "Same day." She went back inside. The porch light stayed on. He walked home the long way, past the hardware store, past the pharmacy, through the quiet streets of a city getting ready for winter. He thought about a girl who carried boxes in the rain and asked if you were going to be okay. He thought about an old woman who kept recipes underneath bowls and who had decided, on a kitchen floor, that she was not done yet. He thought about a card in his pocket and a bowl on his desk and a daughter he was going to call on Wednesday again, and maybe Thursday after that. He had turned back on a Tuesday in November because a girl was cold and a box was getting wet. That was all. That was everything. The story did not belong to anyone else. It was theirs. Bea's and Ev's and his. the way the most important things are always held between the people who live them, quietly, without needing to be told.